I knew the gun was on his leg. I don't know if he had his hand on top of the gun. I recall Mr. Hamilton telling me that he walked over and took the gun from him, that he had it
On his knee?
on his knee.
Okay. And so you would agree, and I'm sure you've been trained in this as well, you would agree that in a situation where you're in a darkened area, you're in a theater, there's been a shooting, you certainly don't want to be displaying that weapon out to the entire group because someone else may have a gun and start shooting, correct?
That would be a very pertinent thing to do, not to display it.
So Mr. Reeves, immediately after the firing the shot, was in training protocol, putting that gun immediately on his knee out of sight.
Yes, sir. Common sense.
Well, it's common sense and training, correct?
Yes, sir.
Immediately after the shot took place, correct?
Yes, sir.
And you're taught as a police officer that the minute that you stop the threat, you don't keep shooting, right?
That's correct.
One shot in this case, and only one. Correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Training protocol. Is following that training.
Yes, sir.
You finished that interview with Mr. Reeves. And let's talk about the time, because I want to make sure we've got this time sequence nice and tight. What time did you finish, Mr. Reeves? 3:40. I thought you wrote it down on that piece of paper there.
I finished at 3:40.
At 3:40.
Yes, sir.
Okay, and so now you are going into what investigative mode? What are you doing now? After you finish that, you go to Mrs. Reeves, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, so let's talk. What time do you start Mrs. Reeves?
One moment, sir.
I'm sorry.
I started that interview at 16:25.
Also known as 4:25, right?
Yes, sir.
16:25. And you finished that interview at 16:38.
That's correct.
How many minutes is that?
That's 30.
I hope it's not 30.
No, 30, 45 minutes. Oh, you talking about for Miss Ray's? I apologize, sir.
Yes, that's okay.
That's 13 minutes.
You had a 13-minute interview with Mrs. Reeves.
That's correct.
And this one you recorded immediately. No pre-recording by you.
That's correct.
And she was a witness, not a suspect.
That's correct.
And so you didn't violate the protocol of the sheriff's office.
That's correct.
And Mrs. Reeves likewise told you that she was scared.
Objection, Judge, to hearsay.
Sustained.
Okay. You spoke to Mrs. Reeves for 13 minutes, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And so after that 13-minute interview with Mrs. Reeves, you decide to go back and interview Curtis again, right? So let's try to take the scenario if I can. Alan, Angela, right?
Yes, sir.
Curtis,
Yes, sir.
Mrs. Reeves,
Yes, sir.
now back to Curtis, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And so when you go back to Curtis, what time was that? I've got it right here if that makes it easier.
1643.
1643. 1643, right? Which would have been what?
443.
443. And then you finished that at 1648.
That's correct.
Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Let's talk about between 1643 and your last interview with Mrs. Reeves. You finished Mrs. Reeves' interview at 1638. Is that correct?
That's correct, sir.
And you started Mr. Reeves' second interview at 1643.
According to my notes, yes, sir.
Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
How many minutes is that?
5.
5 minutes. Okay. And so in between that period of time, after you interviewed Mrs. Reeves for the second time, your testimony is that you go to the command center.
We have a meeting. It's not really a center, but command center, but we have a meeting out in front of the theater.
Okay, so you have to, let's see if I can get this correctly. You were interviewing Mrs. Reeves in the same room?
I believe so, sir.
Okay, and so you have to leave that room, have to leave the theater, you got to go through the doors,
Right.
and go out into the parking lot where you had your makeshift command center, right?
That meeting occurs right there outside the front of the theater, right there in front of the box office.
Okay, and would you tell the ladies and gentlemen of the jury again the purpose of that meeting?
To discuss the case, the information that patrol deputy or detectives had received from their witnesses, their interviews.
To discuss the case. So that's a very important meeting, is it not?
Yes, sir.
Because you're trying to get information from all the various sources of witnesses that are being interviewed, correct?
Yes, sir.
And these witnesses are being given voluntary statements for them to write down what, in their opinion, they saw. Right?
Yes, sir.
And so that's a lot to look over, right?
Yes, sir.
And so it must have taken you probably, what, a minute to get from the room that you were interviewing Mrs. Reeves to that meeting up front?
Possibly, yes, sir.
So that leaves us 4 minutes. And so now, it must have taken you at least 3 minutes to go from the meeting to go back to Mr. Reeves, right?
I'm not for sure, sir, how long it would have taken.
Well, he was in the back, right?
Yes,
In a
sir.
car. And the meeting was out front of the theater.
Yes, sir.
But it'd take you at least 3 minutes to get there, right?
There again, sir, I don't know. It would have
So
taken.
you must have had a 1 minute meeting with your group outside the theater, because those are the numbers, right?
Yes, sir.
A 1 minute meeting you had to discuss all of the evidence that allegedly had been uncovered at that point, right? 1 minute.
I tend to believe, sir, it was longer than that.
Well, the numbers don't add up, right?
That's correct.
And so tell me who you spoke to outside the Cobb Theater for a minute that gave you enough information for you to go back and tell Mr. Reeves that you were going to charge him with second-degree murder.
We had stood there and talked. The detectives, command staff was there. Sergeant or Captain Eckley, Major Corbin, the sheriff, Detective Harris, Sergeant Sessa, and they had said that no one had seen a punch being thrown, and that no one had seen the suspect coming over the chair.
Oh, you must have told him, wait a minute, I spoke to Mr. Hamilton. He says, yeah, that, Olson was leaning over the chair and he was yelling and he was cursing. I'm sure you told Captain Sessa that.
Your Honor, I'd object to the characterization of the question. Leaning over and coming over are two very different things.
Sustained.
What did you tell Captain Sessa about your interview with Mr. Hamilton?
Sergeant Sessa.
Sergeant, sorry.
I think the We didn't go into in-depth, we didn't go in depth. We simply wanted to know if anybody had seen a punch being thrown or anything being thrown at the victim, or at the suspect. We wanted to determine if anybody thought that the shooting was justifiable.
Well, in a minute, that's hard to do, right?
There again, sir, my times could be off.
Well, times are important, aren't they?
They are.
They're critical. They're part of the evidence, right?
That's correct.
And in a homicide case especially, we can't afford to not be correct, right?
It's very important, sir.
And so, nobody saw a punch being thrown. Nobody saw a phone. That was like the deciding factor for you, right?
Being thrown.
The being thrown.
Yes, sir.
And so, darkened theater, correct?
Yes, sir.
You don't know how dark it was because you weren't in there to see it for yourself.
That's correct, sir.
You hadn't gone back into the crime scene and said to the manager, please turn the lighting to the lighting that was present during the previews so that I can sit in this chair that Mr. Reeves was sitting and I could experience what he was experiencing. You never did that
No, sir.
before you had that meeting with, I guess it's the brass of the sheriff's office, right?
That's correct, sir.
You never went to the manager and told the manager, hey, by the way, I also want you, in addition to put the lights down, I want you to put those previews on. Because I want to sit in that chair and I want to experience whether the loudness of the previews
Your Honor, I'd object.
had any effect.
I mean, from the approach, or it's just an improper form of questioning.
I'll overrule.
You never did that, did you?
No, sir, I did not.
And did you tell the brass there at the Pasco Sheriff's Office, say, by the way, I haven't even gone into the crime scene? Did you tell them that?
No, sir. We were aware of...
Well, you may have been aware. You didn't tell them that you had not been in that crime scene. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Detective, the first time that you went into that crime scene was at 5:32 in the afternoon.
If I may.
You may, please. You maybe want me to try to hide it for you really quickly?
Yes, sir, because I don't seem to have it noted here. You have the crime scene log?
I think I do. At my fingertips.
Thank you, sir.
May I approach?
You may.
It's in the first page, Detective, very top.
There you go. Yeah, I apologize, sir. 1732. That's
Thank
correct.
you. May I have it back?
Yes, sir.
Now, let's talk about that very important process of the case, because your job's not over, right?
No, sir.
You may have told Mr. Reeves and charged Mr. Reeves at that point with second-degree murder. Let's talk about the number. Was it 2 hours, and in 2 hours and 16 minutes from your arrival, you're charging Mr. Reeves with second-degree murder? In 2 hours and 15 minutes, 16 minutes. That's why I became a lawyer. My math is... Tell me if I'm right.
About that, yes, sir.
Okay. So now, your job's not over, is it?
No, sir.
Your job now, you're going at 5:32 for the first time into this, and let me call it an incident scene, because that's what it is, correct?
Objection. I don't even know how to phrase this. Improper.
It's an incident scene where the incident happened. Correct?
Overrule. Overrule.
It's only a crime scene if someone's at fault. Would you not agree?
I consider it to be a crime scene.
You consider it to be a crime scene. Okay, so we'll call it a crime scene. So now you go into the crime scene and Detective Smith is there, correct?
Yes, sir.
And you have some forensic people there as well, right?
That's correct.
You already know about the phone.
Yes, sir.
Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
But you still don't know what seat Mr. Reeves was actually in.
Pointed out that seat at that time.
Well, we're going to get to that.
Okay.
Okay. And so when you go in there, you don't know what seat Mr. Reeves was in.
I knew that it was on the back row. I knew that it was in the center, but the actual numbered seat I did not know.
Okay. And so when you go in there, do you see the phone? Do you see the phone at 5:32 in the position of that aisle?
I'm not for sure, sir, if I saw it there or if it was pinned with a pin marker.
Meaning that there could have been a pin marker there, but the phone may not have been there.
That's correct.
And so I'm sure that at some point in time in your investigation post-entry of the crime scene, that you discovered that the phone had a black case. Correct?
Yes, sir.
And so if, excuse me a second, Your Honor. If I am throwing a dark object in a darkened theater, you may not be able to see it. Right?
That would make sense, yes, sir.
That makes a lot of sense, doesn't it?
It would be difficult. It would be possible that that could happen.
So did you go up to Smith and say, "Let me see the phone. Let me see the phone. I want to see the phone."
No, sir. I knew what a cell phone looked like. We did not want to. We don't handle phones. We had photographed it. We knew where it was at. We had it pinned. They're handling the crime scene properly.
Well, you hadn't been in there. If you arrived at 2:15, you hadn't been in there for at least 3.5 hours, right?
That's correct.
And so you don't know what was happening in there with Detective Smith at the helm, right?
There again, sir, I have complete confidence in my team of forensic investigators and Detective Aaron Smith.
So let me ask you this question. So, of importance, obviously, to you was the darkness of the theater, right?
That's one of the important things. That's correct.
Okay, and so at that point in time, at 5:32 in the afternoon, did you go and get a manager to say, "I want you to dim those lights"?
Objection, asked and answered.
No, that's at 5:32. At 5:32, did you do that?
No, sir.
Was that not important at that point?
I'm sorry, sir.
Was that not important?
What?
To get those lights down while now you're in the crime scene for the first time.
Yes, sir.
So was that not important to you?
I did not. I didn't do it, sir. At the time, I didn't think of that.
This is your only opportunity, Detective, you would agree with me, to recreate the scene that Mr. Reeves was experiencing. You could have sat in that chair. You could have put the lights on at the preview level. You could have put the previews on. You could have had someone that was 6'4" from the battalion of officers that you had there standing where Mr. Olson was. You did none of that.
No, sir.
Well, let me ask you this. Did you get your crime scene technicians that were there in order to memorialize by cameras that very experience?
That day, no, sir.
I thought you were in charge of this homicide case.
I was.
Did you ask Mr. Smith, hey, Detective Smith, we've got some lady here by the name of Amy Parrish who has had extensive training in being able to capture photographs in darkened areas. She's got some expertise in that. Let's get her to do that here. Did you do that with Detective Smith?
No, sir, not that day.
Not that day.
No, sir.
Why not that day?
I didn't think of it, sir, at the time.
You didn't think of it.
No, sir.
And was that because you had only had one case in the past dealing with self-defense, Detective? Is that the reason why you didn't do these things? Difficult question, isn't it?
I tried my best to do the very best job that I could as far as the investigation.
Detective, I don't doubt that you tried to do your best. That wasn't the question.
Right.
The question is, do you think that the reason that you didn't do these things is because at that point in time you did not have the experience in dealing with a self-defense case?
I had limited experience with that. Yes, sir. That could be a possibility.
Possibilities are dangerous in our criminal justice system, you would agree.
Yes, sir.
We can't afford to make mistakes, can we, Detective?
No, sir.
Because you have a man's life in your hands as well.
Your Honor, at this point I would object.
Sustained. If you have much more, it's time for a
We do have quite a
break.
bit.
All right, let's take a 10-minute recess, please. Remember my instructions during the break? Thank you.
All rise for the recess for 10 minutes.